So hello, everyone, those who have been able to join on time, welcome. We'll just give ourselves maybe another 2 minutes. It's now 4:03, another 2 minutes to see whether we can have a few more joining, and then we'll begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joy. Okay. Let me share my screen. Welcome everybody to the GoDown, the 5th urban dialogue that the GoDown is hosting. And I've been asked this question a number of times recently. Why is the GoDown Art Center interested in urban issues? So the main reason, or some of the issues that are happening right now are we've just come out of the COP27 conference, which was happening in Egypt, and the big mega trend at the moment is, of course, climate change. And the report that preceded that conference that was released earlier this year by the IPCC, the 6th report, it said that we have very little time to address climate change. In fact, it said we have about 1,000 days to address climate change. But aside from climate change, there are these other mega trends that are happening: demographic shifts, urbanization, rapid urbanization, technological changes, and other processes and other trends. And this is what researchers are telling us. Aside from that, now there are other challenges that are being manifested in the urban areas, in particular this a sort of socioeconomic stunting. And those terms in particular are were referenced earlier this week by the African Center for Cities, which is an institution based out of the University of Cape Town in South Africa. And because earlier this week they held a conference on African infrastructure future. And it's at this point that I'd like to give a quick shout out to the African Center for Cities. We've had a long relationship with them, not only through the conference, but also through other work that we've done, such as the Utabi Urban Theory workshop that was held earlier this year. And of course, this dialogue, which is being held against the backdrop of this conference that was held earlier this week. So the GoDown's is an art and culture institution. We are based here in Nairobi, in the industrial area of Nairobi. That is us on the top bottom left of the picture. This is the property that the GoDown has been at for almost 20 years. So the GoDown was formed in 2003 and was formed to create a hub for creatives and artists to work together to innovate, and because there was a lack of spaces like this in the early 2000s. The GoDown, through its work as a community center, as an art center, also advocated for participatory processes because it recognizes the community as a reservoir of knowledge. And so the GoDown does advocate for inclusion of the community, marginalized and vulnerable people in the community in particular. And the GoDown does this through work such as its 9 Festival, which began in 2013. That festival was all about the different neighborhoods of Nairobi, identifying or curating festivals that identify different spaces within the neighborhood and to answer this question of identity and belonging. That work eventually led to studies about the GoDown's own neighborhood. And you can see from this image, a proposal for a street network. And by studying the wider city through different neighborhoods and then studying the GoDown's own neighborhood from a perspective of arts and culture, the GoDown then got involved in urban development, issues of public space, mobility, and things like that. And then eventually, because the GoDown got the opportunity to own property in its neighborhood, it started thinking about developing that property to scale up into a civic scale building with more facilities for artists, but also more facilities for the community, a public space that also intersects with all the other public spaces, particularly the streets that are in the neighborhood. And then as part of that work, the GoDown started an urban dialogue series. Today's urban dialogue is going to be the 5th in that series. And the series started late last year in October, celebrating placemaking in urban October. And we've had various discussions. These are all saved on our website and go back to the recordings. So the GoDown, through its work, has been thinking about this question of urban reimagination, has been thinking about sustainable infrastructure, about green buildings, about placemaking, also about planning, zoning, and regulatory reform, and what art and culture, or the role of art and culture in all of these processes. And the GoDown advocates finding wins for everybody, that nobody should be left behind. And so that in the context of today's dialogue, that everybody has a say in the future of the city, particularly in urban areas. And so arts and cultural organizations like the GoDown have a role to play. And so without further ado, I will hand over to Joy to take us through the first of our panelists. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, I am muted and I've been muted. And I think that in the chat there have been hands saying you're still muted. Can't hear you, Joy. Thank you. Okay. So can you hear me now? Yes? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll start again. Sorry about that, folks. I was just saying that, yes, this conversation finds us at a time when Kenya has just announced a nationwide power sort of challenge. So here at the GoDown, we have had a blackout since about an hour ago. And earlier in the hour when we were trying to do a test run with our panelists, of course, we understood then that Kim Gurney, who is in Cape Town, and Miriam Minor, who is also in Cape Town, were sitting in parts of the city where there were also challenges. And I think this Kim then made the remark and said, this actually speaks very well to the situation that cultural infrastructure and cultural actors in cities find themselves and are navigating, which is part of the conversation that we are in today. So I'm here with colleagues who are across the desk from me, and we're going to be sort of muting and unmuting to try and see how to engage without too much echo as we move along. I think it's our pleasure really in this dialogue to have four wonderful panelists. Kim Gurney, who I will introduce shortly, because she will sort of kick off this conversation. We also have Shabu Mwangi, who is based in Nairobi, Kenya. He's a visual artist and he's the director of the Art Center Wajuku. We have Duncan Ogweno, who runs an outfit called Go Sheng. Sheng, he will explain what Sheng is. Nairobi urban is colloquial speak. And then, of course, we have sitting in Cape Town as well, Dr. Miriam Minor, who is from Nairobi, but is currently a research fellow at the University of Manchester and is an urban planner and an African data analyst in her own right. So we'll move through each of these panelists sequentially, but we'll start with Kim Gurney. Kim works as a writer and a visual artist, and of course, a researcher and academic based in Cape Town. She is a research fellow at the Center for Humanities in the University of Western Cape. But of course, we have known Kim through her association with the Africa Center for Cities, of course, that is affiliated with the University of Cape Town. Kim's Panya Roots, Kim's book Panya Roots, is really the impetus for our conversation and our dialogue today. When Kim began this research, we were very excited at the GoDown because I think finally we felt that there was a gaze and a lens that was completely sensitive to the context in which African artists, African arts practitioners operate on this continent. A gaze that is embedded in this context, a gaze that interacts with this context on a daily basis. And so we were very keen to see what would come out of Kim's explorations and research. Kim, of course, has been somebody who is interested in this question of contemporary art and cities for a long time. And we are trying to give her the space to at least give us a sense of her work in this area before we plunge into the actual book, Panya Roots. We know that we have a short amount of time, and so Kim, you'll forgive us for sort of rushing you through a book that for us is really very, very, very important. We had initially hoped to actually dedicate this whole dialogue to a conversation with Kim, but then we thought that we can enrich the dialogue by bringing in the question of language as a part of cultural infrastructure, but also hearing from somebody who is operating an art space in the heart of the city of Nairobi, and to see how this hopefully can give us branches and threads that we can pick up at another dialogue with Kim and the same actors or even different ones. During the conference that has just concluded, Kim, you were tweeting quite a bit and we were following you. And one of the things that you tweeted out was that art can build worlds too. And I think that's probably a good point to invite you to share your explorations in this area and to speak to the work that led you to Panya Roots, and of course, what you have found within Panya Roots. And then after that, we can then speak a little bit about some of the implications and takeaways from your work in Panya Roots. So without much further ado, I'd like to invite Kim Gurney to begin the dialogue. Karibu sana, Kim, as we say in Nairobi. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Joy. Thanks, GoDown, for hosting this dialogue, and to everyone else for joining. Really, GoDown was the first space to say yes to this project. And, you know, it's only a concept note and an idea before somebody says yes. And then it's a project, and then, you know, it becomes a book. So somebody has to get the ball rolling. So that was my first visit, was to GoDown. So it's really special to have this conversation hosted by GoDown. And also for initiating this dialogue. You know, of course, art also connects in the way that infrastructures connect. I remember, you know, a conversation in one of the spaces in Cairo that I had with Simon Jami. When I put it to him, he was curating at the time an off biennale. And I said, you know, what are the significances of these kind of independent, non-state sort of spaces? And he said, it's not so much about the art, actually, which kind of struck me as surprising at the time, but the more I thought about it, the more significant it seemed. He said it's about creating spaces for dialogue and for exchange and for connection to happen. It just so happens to be doing it through art. You know, it seemed really significant. He said, you know, it's quite hard to get around the continent, and he does a lot of traveling around the continent. Logistically, it's awkward and so on. And so we tend to start thinking of ourselves in these kind of islands, you know, and it's really important to connect and to have these conversations, and to realize that although our contexts can be quite different, there's still challenges that have something in common, and there's some solutions that can be shared. So I guess that kind of impetus runs through the premise of the project, which is to kind of go to these 5 different spaces in 5 different cities, and respecting the fact that they are in very different contexts, but still kind of seeking out what they might have in common in terms of what sort of working principles they have in common. So that was at the heart of the project and the idea behind it. Yeah, so I like the fact that you brought a panelist together that might also expand the idea of language and you know, the concepts that we use, because that also actually came up, funnily enough, at the conference this week. There's so many terms thrown around, and I guess that happens. I don't usually go to infrastructure conferences, but you know, it's often this kind of word salad of terms, and that definitely came up again. I was only there for the first day, the academic day. The day 2 and 3 were for policymakers. But there was definitely a word salad going on with all these different terms. And it felt like, because the processes in these cities are so kind of emergent and grappling to describe these emergent processes, that everyone's grasping for new lexicon and new vocabulary. And so there was this phrase, infrastructure ring, you know, that infrastructure is a verb. It's about what it does, not what it is so much, which I thought was really interesting as well. So just to put that out there. The other fascinating thing from that first day was the keynote, which was given by an historian rather than a kind of technical infrastructure expert. And he spoke about infrastructures from the point of view of the oceans, which was lovely, because it kind of, it looked as infrastructures as a kind of from a more than human, from a, yeah, an other than human point of view. So, you know, what connects us, that's more than human. So to get to the project and the work that led to Panya Roots, just very briefly, I'll just cite 2 previous books and why they were significant or led to Panya Roots. The first one was called The Art of Public Space, and these 2 books were set in Johannesburg, actually, and Panya Roots deliberately leaves South Africa behind and goes to other spaces for reasons I'll get to in a second. The first book, The Art of Public Space, looked at a trilogy of projects that explored public space and came to an understanding of public space as common space instead, as kind of contested and negotiated and kind of performed on a daily basis. So if you sort of take the idea of an alleyway that has multiple uses and is very contested and multivalent, I guess, that idea was very formative from that project, and it comes through in Panya Roots as well, because the spaces, that idea of a space belonging to everybody and to nobody was put to me by various people in different ways. And I also came to understand that this is kind of what an independent art space is too. It kind of belongs to everyone and no one. It's got this collective formation and this horizontal structure. And also the art that I went to see was largely in public space or occurring in public space. So that was very useful as a kind of precursor. And then the second book was called August House is Dead, Long Live August House, also set in Johannesburg. It actually took the lens of a building where artists had turned a textile factory into a studio. It was put up for sale and they had to relocate. And so I caught it in this kind of limbo phase. And what came out of that was really how artists grapple with uncertainty. So how do they deal with an uncertain set of circumstances? And what came out of that was this sort of collective formations. And I wondered whether other art spaces dealt with uncertainty in a similar way. And it was this kind of relationship between the individual and the collective. I was just interested to explore that in other spaces and other places. So yes, we deliberately leave South Africa behind in Panya roots. We want to go to other spaces. That was quite on purpose. I think Atul Mbembe here has put it very well when he said South Africa tends to think of itself in two registers, you know, as the exceptional or the miraculous. And we need to start thinking of ourselves as an ordinary country with ordinary challenges. So that was part of that effort as well.
Thank you very much, Kim. Thank you very much for sort of bringing us, or at least giving us a sense of how you arrive at Panya roots. I know that when you were in the process of working on this and you convened a few of us to discuss your research after it had arrived at a certain point, I became very excited by this idea of being able to extract some insights or key principles that seem to underpin the approaches and the ethos of these spaces. And as I said before, I think that being able to step away from ourselves as the people who do the work every day and to see how we might be seen and what the meaning of our work is and what the principles are that underpin us is, I think, something that begins to sort of chart a new way of talking about our work and also of looking at our work. So I'd like to now invite you to take us into Panya roots, to take us through your approaches, your insights, and the implications of these and the takeaways from these.
Sure. Is my screen share coming up?
Yes, it is. Yes, it has.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll just do a full screen here. Okay, so I'll just go through a whistle-stop tour. So this is a little talisman artwork that I'll just put up at the beginning to kind of signify. It's not an artwork that's officially part of the project, but when I sat at an art space in Cape Town discussing the origins, the very beginning of the project, this artwork was facing us at the discussion table. And it really sort of, this interpolation between me and we is kind of what the project's all about, I guess. And so I put this artwork at the top of all the discussion documents about it, because there's something about it, the me and the we sort of flash in turn, and yeah, it just signals what the project's really about, I guess. These are the spaces that I visited in the order of the fieldwork. So as I said, Nairobi was first, then Accra, Cairo, Addis, and Dar es Salaam. I tried to time my visits to coincide with some programming that the art space in each of these cities signaled was somehow emblematic of the sort of programming that they do. And then also to coincide the visit with something else that's going on in public space at the same time as a kind of a parallel festival, like in Accra, for instance, there would be the Shaliwati Street Art Festival, just to have another reading on the city. The method being to kind of correlate or draw juxtapositions between the artistic and the curatorial strategies of these spaces, and then with the urban sort of everyday technologies that are circulating in public space. So the key principles that get surfaced through that method are written up there. I won't go into great detail about them because I'm going to go through each one of the spaces in turn and flag one principle per space. That's not how they work in practice. You know, each space, the principles apply to each space, all 5 of them, but just as a narrative device, I'll just signal one for each space as we go very briefly through them. So this is just for fun to signal the title, Panya Roots. For once, I don't have to explain it to this, this forum because it comes from this site. The board on the one side is from Dickens Otieno's studio. He made the sign making fun of the highway code in Nairobi, and you'll see number 4, use Panya Roots, the get around routes, self-invented pathways that only more nimble travelers can take. And there's a border from Nafasi space on the other side. And all cities have these routes that are only more passable by people in the know. The first space at GoDown, I coincided with the Nainihu Festival, which has been going, as you've heard in more detail before me, been going for several years. And in the year that I joined, it had expanded to include these neighborhood walks, which are kind of deferred to neighborhoods themselves to curate. They inform this rebuild of GoDown that's currently underway, and also inform larger processes in the city, like the master plan and so on. So there's quite a complex, nested intertwining of processes going on, and signaling a principle of horizontality and its kind of deferral and its decentralization and rotation and those kinds of concepts. That's just a quote about the storytelling nature of that festival. And in fact, all the spaces kind of describe what they do in these storytelling terms, narrative building. Anno Institute in Accra, I joined for a future museums project, which is ongoing. And one aspect of the project you can see in the middle is a mobile museum. It actually takes as its referent a kiosk. On the left is an artist studio made out of a kiosk. And the point being that it's permeable and accessible and mobile, and it actually traveled the country going around asking people, you know, what does art and culture mean to you, and how would you like to see it represented, and then going back to those regions and displaying the results of that research to the regions it visited. I'll show an example in the next slide. So yeah, it's basically trying, so this concept of performativity came out of that, performativity in the sense of having mobility and agency, and art as a way of not only saying things, but doing things as well. That's an example of it displaying some of the results. So this quote from Anno is just about the fluidity of time, the fluidity of art and culture, and how, you know, trying to find ways to conceive of that and to represent that in a less static environment. Tanas Gallery in Cairo, all these spaces are caught on the cusp of quite significant change. It actually doesn't exist anymore. It's since closed down after 21 years. All these spaces had been in existence for longer than 10 years, which was quite amazing for independent spaces. But I caught it to see an exhibition, but it was almost overshadowed by the confluence of things going on in the building and the neighborhood and the space around it. And its programming was very, very dependent on what was going on in its surrounding area. So this concept of elasticity came about because it was really, really responding to who's in the building, who's in the neighborhood, what's going on, and being very, very responsive to that. The sort of underbelly of that being refusal and opacity at times. So like an elastic band can only go so far, and sometimes, you know, sometimes you have to say no. After it shut down, it put on this exhibition of remnants from its archive called Taking Stock. This quote just puts into words what I was saying about this hyperlocality and this really animated responsiveness to what's going on around it. Then Zoma Museum in Addis, when I arrived, it just rebuilt itself on a new plot of land. This is Elias Sim on the one side, literally embedding artworks into its walls. the fascinating thing was that it's constructed itself out of architectural techniques going back hundreds of years, sort of traditional techniques that have been overlooked perhaps, and used these sort of ecological principles to build itself in this fascinating way that fused all these time scales. So this principle of convergence came out of that. On the other side is an artwork by Solomon Galeta that's also showing kind of convergence, but in a different way, of different urban typologies going on in the urban fabric. This is a building. You can see how beautiful the walls are. They're like artistic, like artworks themselves. All the walls look like that. And that's standing back looking at the main museum. And it's rehabilitated the land. It's just got this very radical idea of care. So not only in terms of rehabilitating the land, but like it inherited a kindergarten when it bought this land. And instead of telling the kindergarten to move off, it's now a museum that runs a kindergarten, you know. So it's just being very responsible to the space and the people and everything that's happening around it. Its co-founder Mescarim just explaining about sustainability, thinking about sustainability in a different way. And then the last space, a Nafasi art space, which I've just been back to very recently because it's built itself a new art academy, a principle of second chance. So on the left is an artwork by Flora Robinson using kind of recycled materials. And then the shipping containers that it's built out of are kind of damaged shipping containers that it's recycled and built into its facilities. This is the new academy here. And interestingly, it takes as a reference point the local market, the Kariakou market. So you can see the elevated canopy, and it's got the stairwell as well. And it kind of reflects that in its design. So the point is just taking its own context very seriously, and its own programming also reflects that fact. And I'll just end here with this quote from Rebecca, because it really, you know, this tension between institutionalizing and remaining flexible and open is kind of at the heart of what these spaces were trying to achieve, and I think is at the heart of the challenge of running them. I've got one more, which is just the structure of the book. Obviously, I won't go into the detail, but you can see the one chapter deals with the working principles, and the implications, which you mentioned, Joy, just go into taking these principles, which are basically like artistic thinking, and just thinking about how that, you know, if other institutions were to manifest some of these principles, what would that do? You know, so if so although these principles are for independent art spaces, you know, perhaps if other institutions were to think like an artwork, you know, where would that take us? That's what the rest of the book considers. I'll leave it there.
No, thank you very much, Kim. That's a sort of a whirlwind tour through your book and your work in Panya Roots. I think that, yeah, for sure, this question of the implication, what does that mean if others are to sort of take on board this way of working, this artistic way of working, as you described it, to create space, to create other infrastructure? What kind of cities, what kind of spaces might we then have? We thought that it would be important and interesting to probably bring into the conversation a space that you did not look at, to try and see whether, as we hear the story from Shabu Mwangi and Wajuku Arts Project, whether there are echoes of what you have been seeing and finding in these 5 spaces across the continent. Shabu works, is a founder of Wajuku Arts Project. They are based in a part of the city which, depending on who you are, if you're a policymaker or an urban planner, you'll probably say they're sitting in the informal settlement area. They're sitting in the part of town that the city is trying to clean up, in quotes. But I think that of course Shabu and certainly the GoDown, we have a different sense of what these spaces might mean, and perhaps that maybe they can be relooked at. So I will invite Shabu to introduce the space to us, Wajuku Arts Project. We asked him to really talk about the everyday. What does this project do on a day-to-day basis, on a month-to-month basis? How does this space or this piece of infrastructure relate to the community around it? How does the community relate to it? And then also to reflect as an artist on his own work when he takes it abroad. Because for those of you who might know Shabu Mwangi, the artist, they were invited to be part of Documenta 15 this year. And for those who have been following Documenta 15, it seemed to be highly controversial because the key curators who come from Indonesia, collected from Indonesia, of course, came with principles of practice that are quite different from what Documenta has been doing before. And I think it was interesting to read the reviews and the challenges that various critics had around what it meant to have Documenta curated by a collective from the South. And Shabu had the opportunity to make work and to be present in that space as well. So we want to hear the story of the art space and its everydayness, if I can call it that. But then we also want to hear his reflections and insights on transporting himself and the arts and the artwork into a northern city, and what kind of reflection that then gives him around his own location and origins. So Shabu, without much further ado, karibu sana. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks a lot, Joy. Good evening, everyone. As you heard, my name is Shabu Mwangi, visual art based in Mukuru, in Lunga Lunga village, from a collective called Wajuku Art Project. Wajuku Art Project is a collective of young youth who formed the collective around 20 years ago, almost now, I think. And the reason why Wajuku was formed was for us to see life and to survive and to overcome the challenges that we faced during that time, which I think are no longer like present to our environment. So ideally, Wajuku came in mind as a need to show care, love, and supporting each other. And I think the same year when we formed the collective, that's when the GoDown was starting, because I remember walking all the way from our community to the GoDown to get some workshops, and from the previous various institutions which were hosted at the GoDown. And out of that, we really thought of starting something within our locality, because art is always like something that is shared by the community, because it informs the artist on his subject. And we thought of, every time we are taking our art work outside, what can we do with our locality, and what can we do with the place we call home, despite it not being seen as a home, from a different angle. And that's when we kind of really strained to build a structure, because we don't call them buildings here, we call them structures, because you never know when one can be structured down. So we build the first space for Wajuku, and with the time there were a lot of kids coming to look what's happening within the space. And out of that, we realized that this space is no longer like a private space for artists. It has a lot to do with the environment and also the kids who are in this community. And out of it, we started the program where we were offering classes to kids during Saturday and Sunday. And we had to also inform ourselves on how to work with kids using art. And we partnered with different organizations, learning different skills on art therapy and also counseling, because as an artist or as a collective, we really understood the need for a kid to have a safe environment where they can express and share their life without really feeling limited by what they see or what they undergo in their day-to-day life. And that's how our Kids Club program was born. And out of Kids Club program, we have mentored over 200 youth now who have gone through our workshops. And normally what we do with art here is not to teach someone to be an artist, but art is always a tool for us that we know can give you a window from which you can dream and be yourself despite your surrounding or environment. And out of Kids Club, we also have a program where we do mentorship program to young kids who grow through our programs. And we try to give them like short-term skills or courses, which later in life they can apply in their life, because as you understand, we live in a city which really has a big population, and the joblessness is like the key element that you hear everywhere. And for us as artists, we can't say we are jobless, but sometimes we can say we lack resources to execute what we think or what we seek and bring change within our locality. So I think the next image also, the Kids Club program for us is not only a program where kid will come, eat, and then go home. It's also like a ground where we shape our culture and also show our identity, because as a community, we have an identity, and we really have to stand for it and bring the dignity that we feel sometimes is not seen when someone doesn't term this place as homes or place where people live. Because when it's termed like an informal settlement, then you question, are we informal in this environment? Because we are the ones shaping it, and we have a culture where we want to feel at home. We want to feel grounded. We don't want to live in like a bubble where every day we have fear of tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen with our environment. I have been here for 30 years, but it's the same fear every day since I was a kid, that one day the community will be evacuated. And it happens bit by bit, face by face. It's something which I have been seeing when I was a kid, and up until now is happening. So going back to art and why art, and what art does to us as artists living in the community. I think art really brought sense of belonging and sense of identity when we were really youth and trying to find ourselves, at the same time trying to support life. If you can go back around 2006, 2005, Mukuru was really like a very bad place and unsafe space for a young person to be. And with art, we really committed ourselves, and we say, we committed ourselves to supporting each other just to see tomorrow, because there was no tomorrow for us. And in the process, we lose 6 of our members, which is always like a reminder of why Wajuku is here. And that's why, despite that we are growing of age, we always want to see that Wajuku will always be there. Like Kim was presenting, and she talked about our vision as founders. You know, we always have to have a vision for the next generation, which I think is in place. And with time, we have developed another space. Now we have separated the social aspect of Wajuku and the artist aspect of the collective. So in this photo, we have a space where we do workshops. We host artists from other places or other informal spaces, because we always like to be in solidarity with other neighborhoods like Mazare, Kariobangi, and so on, just to give sense to artists who come from such areas, because in most cases you find we create art and then we take it out of the community, and the community never had space, never had time to understand or interact with the art, which I think they are the primary people who should interact with the art, because all art spaces or art collective spaces, I think they are public spaces where I think is for other people to learn from our view and how we view the community or what we project to the outside world.
Excellent.
The
No,
next
thank you
image.
so much. Yeah, we can have the next image for Shabu on
Yeah, yeah.
document. Yeah.
Yeah, so the talking on art and the progress which has been there since we started, we were lucky to be part of a collective who were invited to take part in Documenta 15. And for us, I think it was like a dream which we didn't know how to handle it or to approach it. But since we had a meeting before with the curators, and they told us, just be free and do what you think you want to express. And our space, what we did was like wrapped reality is the theme of the whole setup of the installation, and we wanted to share our world and on how we see it, because in most cases informal community are not given the image that is from inside. Most of the time people are talking from the suffering side of it, or how infrastructure are like misery, but we really have a work to do and inform the world that despite our environment, there are hope, there life in here. And the reason why we took our community in document and really build a structure which representing our community was to try and give our story from a point where we think we are not only a subject to be studied, but also we can teach something. In most cases, when you find there is like exchanging program or for scholars, is always one way. We never get a chance where we can go and teach what's within our locality. And I think also I encountered some journalists who are kind of looking our work just from a point of our surrounding, like this will this help your community? But we don't only talk for our community, but we talk for all humans, because I think whatever we are facing in this area is also faced in other areas, and we are part of the change that we want to see. And if we can't voice out what we go through each day, then the solution which will come will never solve what we face. It will be from something totally which is not on the ground. Yeah, so we were questioning things to do with education, historical injustice which took place but are never addressed, because informal settlement are a result of something which happened in the past. It's not something that someone project that a government project that we're gonna build a slum. These are a result of a failed state or failed institution that didn't really foresee these things. And for us, we are here just to really change where we can, and also impact the community with the knowledge that we can overcome this despite the challenges.
No, thank you, Shabu, and well said. And maybe just on a last note, because I think what you're speaking to there, I didn't interpret or explain or translate what Wajuku is, but perhaps for the sake of those in the call today, where does the naming come from? What does it mean? Because we're about to go into language with Donkey briefly.
Yeah, so Wajukuu is a Swahili name which means grandchildren. And when we were forming the collective, we were still teenage, and we thought of a Swahili proverb which says "Majuto ni mjukuu," and we thought like we are facing the consequence of something which was not like taken care of maybe by our parent or our grandparent, and we say we can cut the chain by not inheriting this chain. We can change things, so we called ourselves Wajukuu.
No, thank you. And I think that bringing that into Kassel, in Documenta, to Germany was interesting. Yeah. And as you say, whether that was understood, that in a sense, that majuto ni mjukuu, you know, the regret or the remorse of actions taken prior that bring us to this place, whether that was understood or seen in the art that you brought to Documenta, but very, very, I think, very, very poignant. Thank you, Shabu. Thank you very much indeed. Maybe before we go to Donkey, I can, if I may, Kim, just ask you to respond, if you have any response to the story of the very brief story of the Wajukuu Arts Project, where I'm curious around Shabu distinguishing between buildings and structures, an echo of something that you said was happening with the conference in Cape Town, the language of infrastructuring coming up as a verb, and this notion of structures or structuring also as a verb, creating space, not necessarily creating an art center or a physical building, but creating a space that has a particular purposes. And Shabu mentioned some of them: supporting life, caring, loving each other, providing a safe environment, and so on. But yeah, but I think that you've probably heard a lot more, having looked at spaces over the last few years. You've probably heard a few more things in there that Shabu has shared.
Yes, that also caught my ear, the structure, because you never know what's going to happen. I was just this morning, when I was assembling my thoughts, I was remembering how when I revisited Nafasi, you know, they've built their spaces out of these recycled shipping containers, and I had, you know, made these connections with, you know, you see quite a few things built out of shipping containers in various different places. But what I discovered on my return trip was that the reason it's built that way is actually because when they used to be at a different site, and they lost that site at quite short notice. And the reason they built that way is to be nomadic, so that if they had to move again, they were ready to go. You know, so it had quite a different meaning. It wasn't, you know, to be hip, to be built out of containers. It was because it was practical, you know. So it had a very different meaning, because it came out of almost like a traumatic event, out of having to move quickly in the past, you know. So just that you know, it was a structure, I guess. It wasn't a building, you know. So I was just thinking about that when he was talking. And the one thing that I was going to say is just that beautiful line, we are part of the change that we want to see. One of the big takeaways for me was just this idea of thinking as if rather than as is, you know, which came across through all these projects, which is a power of the imagination, like to think about the kind of world you'd like to see, and then to institute it now today through these spaces, you know. And that was like an idea of sustainability that was very different. Like none of these spaces, when people ask me about sustainability with these spaces, I'm like, to me, it was like they don't think about sustainability in that way, like in green, you know, green sustainability, or not that that's not important. There is an ecological principle at work, but it's about a world that is sustainable, and to think about how to build the structures in terms of institutions in inverted commas, because it's more like para institutions, to institute a world that you want to see tomorrow, but to do it today, you know. So that's that lovely phrase, like we are part of the change that we want to see. It's like doing it today, you know, bringing that in today. So I just wanted to flag that and say that that's like, that sensibility is like very present in the ethos of these spaces.
No, thank you. No, thank you. And I think that, you know, that majuto ni mjukuu brings us to donkey. So that is a Kiswahili proverb, as Shabu shared. But when we come to donkey, we are moving beyond Kiswahili as some of us might know it, and looking at a language that, of course, begins to emerge with urban living, you know, way back at independence, and maybe even before that, as people were interacting in the colonial city. So much so that I think, in our view, Sheng, and I think that you might concur there, Danki, but let's hear from you, that it's really forms a part of what Nairobi is. And what's interesting around Sheng, of course, is that it's a language that changes from decade to decade, from neighborhood to neighborhood. I recall, you know, using a Sheng word that was the current word many years ago when I was younger, and I was talking to a younger person, and they said, "Don't use that word. It has a completely different connotation and not a good one. We don't say that anymore." So yeah, it was just to show me that this language makes and remakes itself and redefines. Words take on new meanings. But so for you, Danki, this slide that everybody can see here is the GoDown's recasting of the sort of larger neighborhoods, if I can call them macro neighborhoods of Nairobi. And this was to help us actually sort of structure Nainihu, the festival that we run. And as we were doing this festival, of course, neighborhoods had names for themselves and had names for other neighborhoods. And we have named them using the Sheng from one particular neighborhood, which is Dandora. And so as I invite you to talk to us about Sheng and its role in the formation of Nairobian identities and the formation of the city, is to probably also, if you care to, reflect on some of those names that we use across neighborhoods. So karibu sana, Danki. Welcome.
Thanks, Joy. Good evening, everyone. When I got this invite, as usual, of course, we said yes without knowing what the content was first, because for us, whenever it comes to partnering with the Go Down, it's always a yes. Then we'll ask questions later. But that's really because the kind of work that goes on at the Go Down sits square with what we do. Go Down has been a curator for close to 25 or so years, and we are also curators of sorts, albeit of the Sheng language. And the work that we've done so far, just by way of quick history, the Sheng project is something I started back in 1986. I was in class 6 then, and it was out of curiosity of wanting to understand why words were being used in the way that they were being used, and where was the union between the words that we know from English or our mother tongue or the different vernaculars that we spoke, and what we were finding being created then. And so over time, it went on to become a database. Then I did a website, which I think Mbugua had put up something up a while back, or it's still on. Yeah, it's still on. So the website is sheng.co.ke. It's a dictionary. And as Joy mentioned in one of her comments, a word could be valid today and tomorrow you don't hear it anymore. So for us, we collect any and every word. So there's nothing like an old or a forgotten word. So Joy, regardless of which word that was that you thought doesn't exist, it still exists in our dictionary. So ours is to document and curate all of those things. So I've been asked to speak about language as cultural infrastructure. And when you look at Nairobi's landscape, the way the colonial government had segmented the city was sort of really just to put people in different enclaves based on their ranks or cadre in government. And you find that most of what is Eastlands, or what was known as Eastlands then, where you had your Shaurimoyos, your Kaloleni, Jericho, Maringo, there was no Buruburu then, those areas, they had people who were in the menial jobs. There would be your, when you're looking at the railway workers, these would be your coal shunters, these would be the water people, these would be the workshop people. And by design, the colonial government didn't want them sharing space with their families. And so when you look at the birth of Sheng, in fact, the map that's up now, if you look at how Sheng started and went out to Nairobi, the known or documented, better documented history of Sheng in Nairobi comes from Jogoo Road, and Jogoo Road specifically Kaloleni, Shaurimoyo, and your Bahati areas. Now, by design, because of the kind of people who are working for the railways, you'll find that a lot of those who worked for the railways at that time were the Luos and Luyas. And so a heavy influence of Ali Sheng had, you had markers that showed you where that person came from. So if you look at again, what you had in the 70s, a lot of Sheng words were prefixed with the letter O. So someone like a president was called Orezo. If you were going to class, you went to Olado. So some of those words in that time were actually prefixed that way because the originators of those words came from those places which were influenced by their mother tongues. Come mid-80s, when now Kikuyu influence got into the language, you find what was an O has become a U, and places which didn't exist, like Kangemi, Udhiru, and so on, are now calling it, instead of Omado, it becomes Umado with a U because of a Kikuyu sound. So again, having crossed from one side of the city to another side of the city, the layout changes because of the influence of the dominant language in that place. Now, when we look back at how language contributes to the psyche, the mental psyche of Nairobi people, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, which side of Uhuru Highway do you live on? Yeah. So when we are talking about the posh side of Nairobi, you'll hear someone say they live on the other side of Uhuru Highway. So the Uhuru Highway seems to have been the undocumented marker that separates the affluent side of Nairobi from the not so affluent side of Nairobi. That in itself has an interesting contribution to how language developed in those two places. So you find that on the east side of Nairobi, we have what we call Sheng, and on the west side of Nairobi, west and south sides of Nairobi, you have what we call English. And English really is just a language whose base or foundation is English, but you still borrow from vernacular and any of the other languages present in Kenya. So you'll find if I hear you speaking English and I'm from east side of Nairobi, I'll immediately profile you and say, for sure, this guy can't be coming from this side of my hood. He definitely comes from somewhere else. And so when the question is asked, what are people responding to when they use make and remake Sheng, it goes back to the very purpose for which language was invented. It's for communication. And many a times you'll hear people say, in fact, like in the recent, it was about 7 or 8 months when there was this young band of boys who came up with Shembeteng. Unfortunately for them, they were vigorous, but in the wrong direction. You don't just wake up and create a language. Language is created organically. Yeah. So they did try. There's still drips and dribbles of it findable within online space. But the truth about it is that language is organic and it grows as an essence of interaction between people. The same way Swahili was born out of interaction with Arabs from the coast. When you ask me to describe how my Sheng journey has shaped me as a Nairobian, the question is probably difficult to answer because as a Nairobian, I lived an interesting era. We are 70s babies, so we straddle interesting times. We straddle parents who came from upcountry. Then we also straddle this time where technology has taken over everything. So we have the benefit of having seen 3 generations, or 3 cycles rather, not generations, 3 cycles of change in how Nairobi perceives itself. So when you look at that period from 70s to 80s, a lot of the conversation around the cities was really about people still having really deep ties to upcountry. For me, as a Nairobian, back in the 70s and 80s, we didn't even know each other's tribes. By name, you could infer that someone is a given tribe, but it didn't matter because for us, the common language that we spoke was that Sheng. That's what defined us. In terms of how we managed to wiggle out of profiling was really for us to just speak how we knew. So we didn't even labor to speak Sheng. It's what was spoken everywhere. Unless, of course, you were in school, where then the system required that you speak in English or Kiswahili. In terms of how Sheng has influenced our sense of perception, I think one of the biggest contributors that's rarely spoken about is music. The music scene has really exploded Sheng to the extent that you now have Sheng in TZ, you have Sheng in Uganda, though more prevalent in Tanzania, largely because a lot of the artists live and spend a lot of time in Kenya. And so that's an interesting thing. So similarly, the way you have Swahili spreading all the way to South Africa and being part of their syllabus, there's no dismissing the fact that one day for sure, we might find Sheng has permeated all the way down south and taken over those regions. And so being someone who was born and raised, I was raised in South B. We called it B or Sao B. My version of Sheng was markedly different from what was spoken in other places because South B was not a homogeneous area. It was cosmopolitan, it was mixed. So we had Indians, we had Kikuyus, Luos, Kamas, everywhere. And so our Sheng reflected that. So my perception would have been a kaleidoscope of sorts, psychedelic, if you may, because everyone was in the pot. And so we mixed and melted our language as was possible with whoever it is that we met at that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Danky.
Sorry, Joy.
Sure.
Just a quick one. I'll switch over to, sorry, I was just going to say, I'll have to switch over to my phone because the laptop now is dead and Kenya Power sent us a notice. I think it's everywhere. So I'm switching to the phone.
It's everywhere. That's okay. That's okay.
Just one second.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, you can
Thanks.
switch to the phone. Can you still hear us as you switch or not? You can, I think. You can still hear us.
I'll switch while this is still running so I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, because I was just going to ask you to perhaps share some words with us, that Sheng words that describe house or home, that describe neighborhood, that describe hangout, that describe buildings, just so that we have a sense of what these spaces within the city, how they're defined or languaged through Sheng.
So for house, there are several, but the ones that come top of mind would be Keja, Mbachu, Jakes, which is a wordplay on Keja, Digs, which is English for home, then Hao, which is derived from house, and then a 70s one, Home, which is really just English word home, but you hyphenate it by saying Home. And then for buildings, the most common really is just Goro or Mbachu again. Neighborhood really stays just as hood, Amamta. What else? Bachelor pads, digs, home, house, hangout. Yeah, those pretty much describe what you've asked.
Yeah, and so where does Keja come from? And where does Bays come from?
They're English words. Keja just comes from cage, C-A-G-E.
Right.
And so your cage is where you live. And so that got converted to Keja.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I know, Danki, that you're of course, you're a custodian of these words, and you try and put them in a dictionary and try and keep gathering them. But I think that it might be interesting to see what the selection might imply, because Keja and cage as a homestead has particular connotations, perhaps for certain people. Base as well, you know, even though it comes from the word base. Again, what are those connotations?
Yes, base is the same, which for today's kids they call Zabe, Z-A-B-E, which is a reverse wordplay of base.
Right, yeah. Right. No, very interesting, very interesting. And I think that Miriam, I hope that you are sort of thinking through some of these, because I think when we get to Miriam, we're going to be trying to see how this information, language, and the actual work that is happening in cultural spaces, whether these are interesting data points for planners, for policymakers, around really understanding what is going on beneath the surface with city residents and in the city itself, and in the shaping and the making of the city. So thank you very much for sharing those, Duncan, and I'm sure that we will probably have questions for you as we go into the open discussion. And then again, I'll just come back to Kim to just see whether again there's anything that resonates there for you before we look at a short break where we'll ask you some questions. Yes, but Kim.
Yeah, I'm just absorbing it really. Yeah, yeah. No, it's fascinating to hear. So I'm just learning a lot from it. So letting it sink in. Yeah. Nothing, no direct questions from me. Yeah.
Great. No, thank you. Okay, so we thought that just in order to prepare to give Miriam some space to also digest the three panelists that have come before her. Because she's going to just have a quick reflection on it. Of course, she also has her own intervention, that we would have a little Mentimeter moment, which will be run by one of our colleagues here, Rehema. It's really just two questions that play on the title of this dialogue, Urban Reimaginations Through Cultural Infrastructure. And the first one, Rehema asking us to think of three words. They could also be phrases that come to mind for us when we consider the African city, when you think about the African city, whichever African city, but to share three words that might evoke. Mentimeter waits for us to fill in these things. You can see there's a code over there. Mbogwa, yeah, so go to menti.com up there. It says just go to menti.com if you're on a computer and use that code that is up there, and then you know, type in or throw in your three words, and then it begins to form a word cloud, which we will share in a moment. So I hope that is clear. So you just go to menti.com, which is right up there if you're able to connect to that, and then using that code to be able to share your three words. So it's the African city today. And then the second question, which will come up after this one, it won't come up before, just so that you're aware of the words that we're looking for, is that we'll be asking you to share 3 words around the future African city, the reimagined African city. So this is about now, and the next one will be about that imagined or reimagined city. So we're good. We'll give it. There we go. They're beginning to pop up. So that's what it does. It literally just pops up. I can see some very Kenyan words over there. Hustler. Hustler is an interesting word. It's actually now become the national ideology. We have a hustler government and a hustler nation. Yeah, they're all sort of popping up. What's that? Okay, I can keep reading them out. I'm being asked to keep reading them out. Porous, cosmopolitan, resilient, people-centered, diverse, vibrant. Yeah, and as they pop up, we'll just give ourselves a few more minutes before we move to the next one. And yeah, and keep sharing as many as you can. You don't have to be stuck with 3. Yeah, so this should be interesting to see how we see our city, our cities, and then we'll do one more round. And at the end of that, I'm sure that we'll be ready to receive our final panelists and some of the reflections that will come from that. So sounds, the city of sounds.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so we moved on to the second question. We're now trying to say if the first question was about the African city as we know it, how can we reimagine it? What is the future for African cities? So you're welcome to share 3 words about the future of African cities. No one yet. Let me see if I can. Yes, we can see just imaginative, interconnected, public space. Fantastic, yes, more public spaces, imaginative, connected, fantastic, green. Public space is getting a lot of more votes. Public art as well, work and play. Neighbors, fantastic, community, people first, public necessity meeting, playful, earthy, caring as well. Keep the words coming. We're not limited to 3. You can continue. Public space just got bigger. Wakanda, fantastic. Yeah, Wakanda is in the people's psyche right now. I can see bold, yes. Care, rich, of course. We need prosperity. We have more words coming in: connected, got bigger; care, got bigger; just, also just got bigger. Any new words? Determined, safe. Safety, of course, is very important. Resilient, social and ecological. Bold as well. People first. Keep them coming.
Yeah, so we just swapped seats with Boba because my internet, which is right across the room from him, is not working. But this is excellent. I think Rehema, if you can just sort of now put the two together, then we can close this. Yeah, you're not okay. So we'll screenshot them. I think then we can share them later. But I think in the interest of time, we'll now move on to our next panelist. Yeah, there we go. So thank you very much for sharing those, everyone. And to organize me because I'm not on a computer that is mine. Yeah, but I think I'd like to now welcome Miriam Minor to make her intervention, but we had asked Miriam to also listen keenly as the three panelists before her were sharing, so that she can react to that. And Miriam, I think that, of course, Kim has taken us through a very quick tour of Panya roots and giving us a sense of how the art spaces that she was able to visit are looking at navigating realities in different ways, but with some common threads, issues of reuse and adaptation, reinvention, of course. And if I can just speak to those principles as she described them, she talked about horizontality, she talked about reuse, she talked about performativity, elasticity, and second chance and convergence. Then, of course, we heard from Shabu, who confirmed that indeed, I think as Kim shared with the exchange she had with Simone Jamy, that the art space actually serves an even more fundamental purpose than being just about art. And we heard from Shabu talking about their space as a space for supporting lines, a space for survival, as a space for caring and loving each other, as a safe environment, and that, but still a precarious structure that they might have to shift from because of the uncertain environment, the formalized environment that there seem to be. And then we heard from Duncan, who shared with us a little bit about shame and this remaking or reinventing, adapting language from where we are, starting with the mother tongue. And then, of course, this being specific to the spaces that we sit in within Nairobi. So spaces that are richer in diversity, perhaps have a richer lexicon, but also that these change over time as the city demographics also change over time, and that this is an organic process that is happening. That these words also can change and morph in terms of meaning over time as well. So I think my question to you then, Miriam, is that in listening to all of this, just a small reflection, which you may mix with your intervention if you wish, is do you see these as opportunities of or sources of information and data that should really begin to inform how we see our cities and plan for our cities and create policy around our cities, or not? And if so, how might we do this? So without much further ado, I'd like to invite Miriam Minor to come on board and make her intervention. She's going to be speaking around urban cultural knowledge as a strategic asset, because in her work, of course, she gathers data and analyzes data and tries to see how this data can inform planning and policy making. Karibu.
sound of it. Yeah. I can't hear you.
Can't hear.
Miriam, can you hear us? I think we seem to have lost sound. One second, you just, I think we can turn it up on this.
Yes, thank you very much. I can hear you now. Can you hear me? Hello?
Please proceed, Miriam. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Joy, and good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. It's really a great honor to be here, and I was laughing when you were saying I came with an intervention. I really didn't, but it was really a pleasure to be invited to participate and to listen and to learn in this forum, and the presenters that have come before me have really laid a good groundwork for some of the work that I was some of the thoughts that came to me when we were considering this this workshop. So if you'll allow me, you can either start my video, but I'll also just put up my screen just so I can have something displayed. But I'm just going to try and pull some of these thoughts together, because especially starting again, I will start actually from the discussion around Sheng, which I thought was very apt because of the way language itself emerges organically, but also as a necessity for us to try to communicate and to make sense of the spaces that we are in and the lives that we live. And the way the Sheng language has been presented as evolving is very specific to Nairobi's economic, political, and spatial evolution. So the language itself has been shifting over time, and it's also carrying with it a history of what our city is and what our city is going to become, and how it's changing from space to space. And then it was juxtaposed against this idea of obviously what then we are taught in school, which is a very sort of formal, structured English, like a global language that allows us to connect to sort of the economies and to the systems of the continent and to the world. And then now these two languages are existing within the same city, the same space, and keep trying, almost like in opposition. So as Danki was saying, when you went to school and spoke Sheng, you would almost be punished, or you would be asked to switch to English, and almost trying to civilize the language of urban students so that we can become a sort of a certain type of acceptable citizen. And pulling that, taking sort of that principle of what the city is or just becomes out of necessity and out of nature, and this other halfway is like a formalizing effort to try and make it sort of something replicable, something recognizable to the world. I really found that resonating, then coming back to what we are talking about, which is today's book, and pinging that also to the presentation that was made about Wajukuu, and some of the thoughts that we are having about sort of the city and the urban life that we are creating, all of us together. And connecting that especially to the Urban Infrastructures Conference that we came to attend, and that was also set against the COP27 meeting, whereby it's also like a sobering understanding of the world that we live in, and that some of the solutions we have to come up with really have to be more carefully considered, because obviously of the emergencies that face us all as a human family. So at the same time, I was thinking it's humbling to attend these forums where you get to hear of all these innovative spaces and processes that emerge or have been carved out, especially in a city like Nairobi, for teaching, for learning, for collaborating, imagining, for sharing. Safe spaces, for example, for children to come in the evening, spaces of care and community where they can receive some sort of art and training, and form some of these identity spaces. Our cities are really spaces of remarkable creativity, and thanks a lot for sharing about Wajukuu project and the Panya Roots book for covering some of the spaces like the GoDown that have emerged out of this. And yet it doesn't escape us that some of these innovative solutions and best practices have actually emerged out of necessity, out of frustration, and out of a need to try and just survive in environments and conditions of glaring neglect and marginalization, inequality and injustice. So we have to hold these two realities, that at the same time we are celebrating some excellent work, and at the same time that this is coming because, as we were saying, it's because someone else did not create a certain city or a certain urban space that is just and allows everyone a space to be. So we have to hold these two contradictory ideas at the same time. So we can't, when we start thinking around sort of planning and policy education, essentially what you begin to come across immediately is a need to unlearn what you were taught in the schools, what you were taught in the curriculums, or at least try and begin to be more humble about what it means to be a planner in Nairobi, for example, today, or a policymaker, and to reimagine what sort of future urban space we can create. And I was thinking a strong takeaway that came out from Kim's book is some of the core principles that are holding together these art spaces. And those are some of the principles of horizontality, of being elastic and adaptive, of really staying in a point where we're saying the idea is a care and responsibility. And this concept of a second chance, which I really like that phrase. And the art spaces really reflect that, but I'm thinking, why can't we begin to borrow some of those ideas or try to think about them when it comes to what we think of as big sort of technical, professional cultures of policymaking and city building and planning? And as an example, I was thinking, it would be very important to ask ourselves why we have these imaginary lines and boxes around spaces, what we consider to be everyday living, surviving, imagining and existing, that we all do, whether you're a policymaker or an artist or an urban citizen, we all live and create the city together. But then we try and separate that from what we consider the serious work of planning, of policymaking and city building that we expect professionals and technocrats and state infrastructures to do. But we accept that our cities are these hybrid spaces, that both of these things are happening at the same time, and we are all hopefully working together to create a different future, as we saw some of those words that are coming up of what sort of future African cities we want. How can we begin to think differently or to begin to adapt some of these principles into what we consider to be the hard work of planning and city building? And as an example, I was thinking, what happens when we label one project a community-driven innovation and another project a government-led pilot project, right? So one is called an innovation, one is called a pilot project. And if you follow that label, you can see how the pilot project can be expanded very quickly into a program. Our program can become a policy, and our policy is then juiced up with a lot of development funding and investment, while the community innovation can just become a case study of best practice that can remain at a certain scale. And for me, the argument is about the label we assign to the two projects. At the beginning, they could be the same. One could arguably be better than the other, but after a few years of this, after 2 decades, 2 decades or 30 years, one of them is just getting a lot of funding just because of the label it was assigned maybe 20, 30 years ago. Why is that a part of our technical and policy language and practice and our institutional cultures? And that's why we begin to, and at the infrastructure conference, there was a lot of this discussion around all the words, as Kim said, like a word salad of what do we call things? Are they formal, are they informal, are they hybrid? We begin to even introduce new words to try to describe what is just like the everyday urban life. And coming back to this provocation, I really wonder what would our policies look like if we just approach them through what we know is the everyday city, and not through these words and traditional systems and modalities that we have inherited. As we see our languages evolve, our spaces evolve, and even we as residents adapt to them without really blinking. But when it's time to adapt, for example, a state policy, then there's some rigidity that comes in, and that's where we need to be more humble and ask, why is that? Could we have a more nimble way of thinking around policy? Because as urban residents, we occupy, we use, we reuse, we adapt spaces all the time. And why not our systems? That's what I was thinking when I was listening today. So what happens when you take these, and pinging back to the spaces of innovation, such as the ones you were seeing today, what is it that happens when you try to take these nimble, adaptive, and generative solutions and try to fit them into the cultures and systems and languages of planning, policy, and budgeting. What do we lose and why do we lose it? And another question I was wondering, if all these large-scale systems are unable to, or they struggle to understand and adapt to what has been arguably proven to be best practice, then why do we insist on holding on to them? This was a challenge that was posed to us in the research community at the conference, and actually recognizing that this is a privilege to be able to sit down and think and marinate on issues when actually the challenge is to get out there and do. And I really take that with me as a challenge to that we do need to find new ways to work and actually to make what is work better and at scale. And I'm very excited to learn and to learn from the teams represented here and how to think about that, especially if we're saying the problem could be one of scale or one of capacity or one of temporality that makes these spaces that are really valuable become exist in a space of uncertainty, like structure that could be folded up tomorrow, even though these are communities of care that are giving children and residents a space to be. Then the question, if we're trying to be more transformative planners or policymakers, is to say, how can we repair the systems that make these spaces very temporal? And for that is not the planners or the technicians to come and change, and so it's not to bring the technical tools because they have been proven to fail over and over again, but rather to try and learn how one can inform the other. What can we learn in terms of how government thinks it budgets and assigns, for example, financial codes and forms of reporting, and how can we begin to feed from this other end into that? So how can these two languages, I suppose, coming back to the issue of Sheng, if one is nimble and organically evolving and able to really adapt to what is happening, but at the same time, we can see the need to either scale or to make it more safe and secure and permanent, then how can we make these two systems at least communicate in a more integrated fashion? So I'm really excited to learn how to think with and through these terms and how to challenge myself and the technical built environment community in figuring out how to use what we've been seeing today, to better inform these large-scale systems. I would love especially to learn how these exceptional innovations and pilot projects can be normalized into our technical plans, not just become case studies of exceptionality, and how they can be used to inform our zoning, circling back to MK's presentation about the goal of regulatory reform and changing some of our zoning and land use codes that are really rigid, really restrictive, and really disruptive and unjust. How can we use some of these innovations to actually learn how to make new zoning codes, new land use codes, new regulations? And then, because once it's encoded in regulation, I argue, then the resources should be able to flow, or at least these spaces can be secured for a longer term life. And actually, communities of practice can be able to translocate these projects, not just to exhibitions, but actually to the rest of our towns and urban centers. Thank you very much, and that's my time. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. We're just going to bring down one of the other microphones so that we're not in echo. Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Miriam. Thank you very much for that reflection on the run. I think the big question, of course, is how do we begin to do in a different way? And then I think, as you've indicated, the curse of naming. You call a thing, in one way, and it has a different outcome than if you call it in a different way. I know we're running out of time now, but I just wonder whether the panelists, and this is Kim, Shabu, Danki, and Miriam, wish to reflect on each other's presentations or to ask questions or to respond or react to any of those first, and then in the next sort of 2-3 minutes, and then to open up to those in the room to see whether they also have comments and questions before we ask two who are in the room to more formally give us a reflection of what they've heard, just as people who had joined the call. So if I may just start with the panelists, I don't know, Kim and then Shabu and then Donkey, whether you have any reactions to each other, to what we have heard from you today and you've shared with us.
Sure, I'll go first. I'll be very quick. Just to respond briefly to Miriam, which was I think that there's the problem of scale, I think, is such an important point, and I go there a little bit in the book, because there's this critique. David Harvey sort of says, horizontality is all very well, but how do you do anything at scale with that? And that sort of makes the point of that scale can also work laterally, sort of relationality. It doesn't have to also be a vertical thing. But I think, deploying everyday knowledges at scale, I think, is an issue. And me being an impractical person, I can't answer it, but I think that is a big issue. But I do think relationality, is also works at scale. So I think that maybe there's something in there, but I don't know how the implementation part is obviously a big question mark. And then I think it's such an important point Miriam mentioned on, that a lot of these spaces are answering important questions of lack and arise out of difficult circumstances that point to bigger systemic and structural problems, and often the collaborative and the crowdsourcing and all of that, all these solutions they're coming up with are trying to make systemic interventions, but it doesn't overlay the fact that there's bigger work to be done. It's really important. And I think when I said that it doesn't deal with South Africa, it was a little white lie, because there's a little chapter up front that does deal with the toppling of the Rhodes statue in Cape Town. And I won't go down that rabbit hole right now, except just to say that that's toppling flagged a very important occasion of art surfacing infrastructural violence and a kind of showing up inequities in public space, bringing concerns into like a space of power and saying, there are these infrastructural violences going on that need to be attended to. And I use it as an example of how art can surface these things, and not only surface them, but in that case also actually make real changes to the social imaginary and the political sphere and the public sphere, so that it has the potential to sometimes have these effects. And it was actually a precursor to the book also, because it showed that idea of public spaces, common space as well. So I won't go into the detail of that, but just to say that absolutely these issues of real broader problems are there, but I think art has an interesting role to play in both surfacing them and sometimes potentially also triggering some real effects to attend to them differently as well. I'll end there. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Shabu, do you wish to make any comment on anything that has been shared with your co-panelists today?
First of all, is to appreciate everyone, and I would like to I'm very open for collaboration and learning more from each other, and I think in everything that have been presented, I think despite planning and everything, we shouldn't preempt the process, and this is something that most of the time is not put in consideration when things are being planned. We preempt the process and only focus with the destination, which I think art is in between the plan and the destination, which I think need a lot of interaction with the people involved in the place where you are planning on doing something also.
No, absolutely. No, thank you. Thank you for that, Shabu. Not preempting and really engaging people as an aspect, as a core sort of part of the process of not preempting.
Yeah.
Donkey. Donkey, are you there? Or has the power failed him wherever he's at? Okay, but if as we wait, I think that there's some questions or comments that are coming in the chat. Donkey, you're in? Donkey, you need to unmute, I think. Or you says that we need unmute you. Okay, we'll do that. But while that is happening, I'm seeing there are comments and questions. If there's specific, somebody has a question to Miriam or a comment saying she's very curious. Donkey, you're there?
Yeah. The system was saying only the host can unmute me.
Okay, no, that's fine. You're unmuted now. Please, your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. First and foremost, thank you to the GoDown for the invite. Always appreciated, not taken for granted. It's a pleasure sharing the stage with the panelists. Specifically for Kim, I'd be happy to get a copy of the book. Please advise on how that can be achieved. And then for Shabu, kudos, great work, often ignored. Is the space in which he's working, especially with the elements of aspiring the young ones. That's very impressive. So happy about that. And for the audience, or rather not before Miriam, for our participants. I think they may have had questions on the side, so you may want to have what do you call it? A parking lot where some of those questions can be put in, because I noticed some people joined and they were sending questions directly. So you may want to also just put a parking lot for those who are left in to send questions, because obviously we are out of time. Lastly, for Miriam on planning, totally agree with you on the issue of labels, because that's how zoning ends up happening. Red zones, blue zones, black zones, it's all around language. So very interesting conversations. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Donkey. So we have about 10 minutes left, and we will share just a sort of at the end 1 minute of reflection from two people that we've asked to, well, participants. But before we do that, just to see whether we can pick up one or two questions that are directed specifically at the panelists, and to see whether you can get direct responses from some of them. And I'm just trying to scroll through to see whether there's anything that is as direct and as clear as that. And I don't think I see one, but of course, as Donkey has indicated, yeah, so here we have one from Miriam, from Karen Ijumba to Miriam. Curious to know if anyone is writing or thinking about cities becoming informal, and what urban planning theories or templates for that look like. So that's a question to Miriam. Miriam, I don't know whether you've seen that question on the side and whether you'd like to react and respond to that. Miriam, are you with us? You have to unmute, Miriam, or is it us who have to unmute you? See if you can unmute yourself. If not, we are just getting that done for you. Yeah. There you are, you're unmuted. Fantastic, yes.
Okay, my video is stopped, but all good. Yes. So this was definitely not like a theory discussion, but it is something that is really coming up, especially among African scholars, but also scholars in what we is called sometimes like the global south or southern urbanism. It's that idea that the words and the terminologies and the ways of understanding urban that we inherited from the planning traditions that we were trained in are really limited in actually describing what is happening in our towns, in our cities, in our metropolitan areas. So there's a lot of thinking around even what does informal mean? What does informal versus unregulated, and regulated versus illegal? And especially bearing in mind the implications on the lives of urban residents, as you were hearing from George and Donkey, that a label like informal can put a whole community at risk for decade after decade after decade. So the injustice of which word you use is actually really getting clearer and clearer, but urban theorists and planners sometimes can really struggle to know now what to do, how do you change your laws, and who changes these laws and makes it so that, yeah, is it a matter of words, or is it coming back to the principles of what kind of cities do we want to live in and to create for the future? So yeah, it's happening. A lot of planning theory, a lot of urban theory, a lot of sort of urban studies are thinking about these words and what they mean. But even more so, like a lot of practitioners and interventionists, like urbanists, are saying it doesn't then matter. Let's just make sure the cities are safe, the cities are just, the cities are livable, and that no one is at risk. So at both sides, there's a lot of work happening on this, and I really look forward to participating in it in the coming years. And congrats everyone for the work you're doing. It's such an honor to learn about it, and thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you. So I think I will now ask George Arabu, who is a member of the Architectural Association here in Kenya. He's actually, I think, the chair of the Architects chapter, to reflect for a minute or so on what he's heard. And then we will have another researcher who is a strategic consultant for GoDown, Ghana Lunya, to also make a 1-minute reflection, and then we will close. So George Karibu, I hope that you're there with us, George, and let's just make sure that George is not muted sensitively from our end. George? Okay, yeah, please unmute you. Okay, you're being unmuted.
All right.
There you go. Okay.
I also realize I cannot unvideo me myself, but I guess that's not necessary right now. I had a very an earlier brief to also reflect on the conference, which I've just concluded here in Cape Town. And as was mentioned earlier, the opening remarks and presentation set a very good pace. And there was the issues of decolonization that we were discussing, cultural nuances, imaginary alternatives, testing out of various scenarios, and then the issues of planning and placemaking. And I think the Dilip Menon's introductory presentation about the ocean and the drowning of cities was really on the aspects of the human hubris in terms of trying to fight with nature and miserably losing out. But also there's of course the issue of that it sounded like there was doomsday, and that professionals are not helping much, especially on the micro level of development, like earlier the discussions around structure as opposed to buildings. But then, of course, there's also the issues of that there's opportunities in terms of innovations. And then, of course, someone talked about the issues of hyper privatization and the place of civil society, which is quite fighting out for a space in the urban space. I've heard also here the issues of dialogues, especially between the majority who are the poor, and then the minority who are the rich and the leadership. So these are some of the discussions that came out very clearly. But also something I need to mention, that there was a discussion, something I've heard here and I had in the conference, the issues of people as infrastructure. Just imagining, for example, the vast power of the youth that has not been harnessed, particularly in the global south, where we had someone mention something to do with the digital natives. The global digital natives are actually in Africa, and these are people who we are not taking advantage of. There's also something that came up I heard about alternative infrastructure development. Just I'm talking about infrastructure in general, but the idea that the informality that we're talking about here has led to a lot of mess in urban areas. But then it doesn't mean that people don't have those infrastructure, like for example, water. Even if you don't have piped water, how do people get water? You don't have electricity, how do people get electricity? And one of the speakers talked of it as alternative infrastructure that has not been checked. And how are people living right now in urban areas? And it's a very interesting reflection to think about it, because people somehow are making life out of the meager resources and the disconnection from then what you'd call formal infrastructure. And then there's of course some discussions around the African African dependency, and the fact that even the funding we get, which we depend on, is actually very small compared to our growth and the needs. So of course, there's this issue of homegrown solutions to our problem, including financial, where how do we make money, because we are a resource-rich continent, but we don't actually benefit from those resources. And then there was the one of the last discussions were around the soft infrastructure for the soul, and some of these terms just popped up: the issue of social justice, human projects, adaptive leadership, and relationships for humans and institutions, which were very key in making future cities, and the infrastructure are very necessary. And then, of course, the issues of climate change not being localized, because you can't deal with climate from your country and forget, because climate cuts across. It doesn't matter whether you are rich or poor. And then finally, just to reflect on, I did it wasn't part of the program, but I went to visit the local, the Cape Institute for Architects office, and I met the president and the VP, and we had a chat. But one of the things that remained with me was the VP mentioned that she actually is inspired by Ngugi wa Thiong'o's literature, because at the time when she was studying architecture, she didn't have a lot of context of African. There were very few examples of African architecture, and this is a problem we have, that we don't have a lot of best practices and good practices that encourages cultural nuances, Africanism. And for her to read an author, a Kenyan author, writing primarily in Kikuyu, and then that remains with her for the rest of our working life, I think it was very interesting, and just shows how much connected whatever we are picking from various arts is to the whole fabric of urbanism. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, George, for giving us that quick snapshot of what happened in the conference in Cape Town, and then also for reflecting on that visit that you made with the architectural chapter there. I'd now like to invite our colleague Garnet Olochabunya to also just make a quick reflection. Garnet is a literature scholar and a Ngugi scholar, interestingly enough. George, you mentioned Ngugi. Garnet, Karim.
Thank you very much, Joy. And thank you, everybody. It's been very fascinating listening to all the conversations. And I wanted to go back to Panya roots, which I've been reading Kim on and off. And I think what I really enjoyed about your gaze is that it was very, very sensitive to a lot of the issues that we deal with all the time. And, you know, when you did say that, you know, art can build worlds too, I just thought of a rejoinder. You know, art has always built worlds. And here I was thinking of Michelangelo, who's one of the artists I was introduced to here at the GoDown, you know, just in terms of looking at his work in depth and finding that, you know, in order to do a piece, for instance, you know, he needed a piece of marble and he had to build a road to go up the mountain to get the marble and bring it down and take it by, you know, by ship or boat, you know, to where he
My Garnet has just lost sound, so she's going to come over this one. Thank you, everyone. We'll just take another 3 minutes and we'll be done.
Yeah. Okay. So, Kim, you know, you mentioned again saying South Africans should stop thinking of themselves as exceptional or miraculous, and you know they need to start thinking as, you know, just ordinary. And I kept thinking about the revolution that, you know, the roads for whole event was, and even sparking of, you know, Black Lives Matter and other such responses from our people feeling oppressed. But I also thought about my first passport in Kenya. I think I got it in the 80s, and the big stamp on it said, that I could go anywhere in the world apart from the Republic of South Africa, because of course that is the time when I think the entire world was supporting, the struggle against apartheid. And I thought, I'd always thought South Africa exceptional because, I couldn't go there, for a considerable length of time until 1994. So, just some, some thoughts I had as I was listening. The radical idea of care. And I was thinking, I thought care was just, kind of a basic human idea. And I know that right now we keep looking at it that way. And then, of course, the idea from Rebecca that innovation comes out of survival. And yes, I've always believed that necessity is the mother of invention. If you're looking at, Kenya's biggest idea right now, M-Pesa, it comes out of the fact that the majority of us were unbanked and we needed to access money simply. And it has caused, I think, a revolution. Now, the other thing is this question of the formal and informal. I'm going to refer to Connie Smith's book, Nairobi City in the Making, because there she's actually, and we've also looked at it through the idea of the formal and informal as sitting side by side. And I think this is who we are. And so, when Miriam talks about the idea of, the language of policy, for me, I'm thinking, why should we assume that that language should be any more compelling than the ordinary language that the one and the people themselves speak? Why do we hook onto structures that have actually come out of a colonial system? And I've heard George talking about decolonization. How do we begin to question some of these ideas or some of these structures or strictures that were introduced, to control? Nairobi was a city that was controlling that we were not allowed to live here. So how do we go beyond the understanding that we do not belong in the city and actually begin to claim the city? Mamdani, in getting the question right, had said that the idea is that some researchers come into areas to test their theories rather than to really need to understand the people that they are researching on the ground. And Kim, your book doesn't do that, which is one of the things I'm really excited about. But this takes me, to some of what I was saying, that they've lived in these so-called informal settlements, the idea of temporality, the idea of structures, not buildings, and yet that's where he's lived his whole life. Surely his life is valid. It is a lived life. So if we begin to think of it as a kind of a temporal thing going towards some developmental idea, then I think we've really got it wrong, and we need to address things where they are. And then Donkey, I really liked this idea of language as cultural infrastructure, and the fact that you did remind us it was invented for communication. But I wanted to just mention something about music, which you mentioned towards the end, and how you said it had really exploded language. But in Nairobi, for instance, I want to say that the radio actually created a cohesiveness and a shared space before, of course, the internet started. Had groups like Mangele Power, which was a Congolese group. They come into the city and we know that they spoke Lingala, but they also performed Swahili. And that was the revolution, I think, for my generation, that we shared, a passion for Lingala music, which was in Kiswahili. But the other thing you did mention was, and you're using language, you said something to do with psychedelic and kaleidoscope. And I kept thinking of the African American influence on the music of our time, because that's where these ideas came from. And it took me a long time to realize,
that, when somebody sang, they were talking about, drugs and dope, which we didn't have, but was very much a part of our common language. Psychedelic shock, future shock. That was, how it was in and then finally, I just wanted to say, just to highlight what Miriam said in terms of, never stop learning, but also to say that we do have, direct responses to some of these issues like multilingualism. That's, part of, the Kenyan space. Something for which we really, in South Africa, having 11 languages, but of course, not forgetting that South Africa has 11 languages because the Africans were excluded from using, the two main languages for the longest time. These were the languages that were cultivated. So even though we envy it now, that a heavy price has been paid in the past, but for us that, we have a new syllabus now, for instance, insisting on going back to local languages, mother languages, first languages, just so that the students can learn and reclaim cultural space in the country as a nation. So I think I'll leave it there for just now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Garnet. Thank you, Garnet, I think, and thank you again to everybody who has participated. My colleague Mbogo will just give a vote of thanks to all of you, but I'd like to thank the panelists, Kim, Gurney, Shabu Mwangi, Duncan Ogwena, and Miriam Minor for participating in this dialogue. Thank you very much indeed. So Mbogo, if you can sort of wrap us up and say kwaheri. It's getting dark in Nairobi as well, and we have no power.
We have a nationwide blackout. But really, thank you, everybody. As Joy has said, the panelists, our esteemed panelists and colleagues. Thank you also for the African Center for Cities, our partner, and who we are very strongly referring to the research that is coming out of down south. Thank you also to all the participants who joined us. I think this has been a lively discussion. Just a reminder that this dialogue is being recorded and will go up on our website in the coming days, where you can, if you're not able to make it, you can relive the recording, as well as the other dialogue that we've had before. And finally, last but not least, the GoDown, the GoDown team, led of course by Joy, our executive director, as a moderator for today, but also the team behind the scenes, our tech team, our communications team. It's amazing that we've been able to work through our blackout, no internet, hotspotting, computers going off midstream. So very thankful to those. And of course, last but not least, the GoDown team, Rehema and the Mentimeter, and of course, the rest of the GoDown team. So thank you very much. And we'll see you next time. We hope to do another dialogue by the end of the year. We'll share those. But yes, thank you, everyone. Follow us on our socials. We are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. The handles are at GoDown's. And yeah, see you on the other side. Thank you. And we need to, if you can, turn on your video so you can take a screenshot. We always forget about this. So if you can turn on your video very quickly, we'll put gallery view so that we can take a very quick screenshot of all the participants. Thank you. Good. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.